Once the past takes hold, it requires an iron grip and a steady heart to steer toward a better future. Watch the gripping struggles of those who fought to break free from their own history. Subscribe now and learn the true power of a spirit that refuses to stay down.
The moment I saw my brother's name light up on my phone screen, standing in that hospital hallway with an IV still taped to my arm, I almost laughed. Almost. Because I already knew why he was calling. He wasn't checking if I was alive. He was checking if I was dead. Let me take you back to the beginning, because this story doesn't start in a hospital. It starts in a house, the house our mother built with 40 years of her life, her savings, and her hands. A pale yellow craftsman on Sycamore Drive in rural Tennessee, surrounded by old oak trees and the kind of quiet that used to feel safe. Used to. My name is Claire. I'm 31 years old, and until about 8 months ago, I believed that family meant something, that blood was a promise, that the word brother carried weight. My brother's name is Derek. He's 38, and he has our mother's eyes and our father's worst instincts. Our mother, Ruth, had been sick for 2 years. Not dramatically sick at first, just the slow, grinding kind. Rheumatoid arthritis that moved into her spine, then her hips, then her whole world, until she couldn't drive herself to the pharmacy or manage the back porch steps without help. I moved back home from Nashville when her diagnosis got serious. I gave up my apartment, my barista job, and a relationship that probably wasn't going anywhere anyway. I came home because she needed someone and because I wanted to be there. Derek did not come home. Derek sent texts. Derek sent flowers twice, once on her birthday and once after a bad scan, when I think he felt guilty enough to spend $30 on carnations from a gas station florist. Derek called on Sundays when he remembered, which was not every Sunday. Derek lived 40 minutes away. I want you to understand this part clearly, because it matters for everything that comes after. I was the one who drove her to chemotherapy when the arthritis moved toward her spine and the doctors found something else growing there. I was the one who learned how to manage her medication schedule, who slept on the couch for 6 weeks when she couldn't get to the bathroom alone at night. I was the one who held her hand in waiting rooms and watched game shows with her in the evenings and learned that she liked her tea with exactly 1.5 teaspoons of honey, not 2. Derek was 40 minutes away. When our mother started talking about what would happen to the house, I told her not to worry about it. I meant it. I wasn't there for the house. I was there for her. But she worried anyway, the way sick people do when they know time is becoming something they have to be careful with. She called a lawyer in February, a man named Gerald who had handled family estate matters in our county for decades. She updated her will, added a medical power of attorney, and made me the primary beneficiary of the property on Sycamore Drive, along with a modest savings account she kept separate from everything else. The house was paid off. The savings weren't enormous, but they were enough. Around $60,000, the result of a lifetime of careful choices. She told Derek about the will in March. I wasn't in the room for that conversation, but I heard it through the thin wall of the hallway, standing very still with a cup of tea going cold in my hands. He didn't yell. That surprised me. Derek was the kind of man who expressed most of his emotions as volume, and the silence scared me more than shouting would have. He left early that afternoon. He hugged our mother at the door and told her he loved her, and his voice was completely steady, and I watched him from the kitchen window as he walked to his truck, and something about the set of his shoulders made the hair on my arms stand up. Mom passed in late April. Quietly on a Tuesday in the room she'd slept in for 37 years, with the windows open and the oak trees doing what oak trees do in April. I was with her. Derek was not. He showed up 3 hours later. By then, I had already called the funeral home, called Gerald, called her church. I had already cried until I couldn't and then started moving because that is what you do. Derek came into the house, looked around like he was taking inventory, hugged me for about 4 seconds, and then asked when we were meeting with the lawyer. I told him I'd let him know. Over the next few weeks, things were fine on the surface and wrong underneath, the way water looks calm before it drops. Derek texted regularly, which was unusual. He asked about the house, about Mom's car, about whether I'd found any financial documents. I answered carefully and said very little. Gerald had advised me to be patient and to say nothing specific about the estate until everything was formally filed and transferred. I followed that advice. What I didn't know, what I had absolutely no reason to expect, was what Derek was doing while I was grieving. I found out on a Wednesday morning in June. I had gone to see Gerald to sign some final transfer paperwork. I arrived at his office on Main Street at 10, the way we'd arranged. His receptionist, a kind older woman named Pat, came out to the waiting room with a look on her face that I can only describe as carefully controlled. She told me Gerald needed a few extra minutes and offered me coffee, and I said yes because I needed something to do with my hands. Gerald came out 11 minutes later. He closed the door to his office behind us and sat down across from me and folded his hands on the desk, and he said, "Claire, I need you to know something before we go any further, and I want you to hear it from me directly." He told me that 3 days earlier, Derek had come to his office, that Derek had presented documents, notarized documents, he said, which claimed to be a revised and more recent version of our mother's will, a version that left the house and the full savings account to Derek as primary beneficiary, with a small, almost symbolic amount designated to me. He told me the documents were dated 2 weeks before our mother's death. He told me they were forgeries. Gerald had handled our mother's estate documents himself. He had the originals. He knew her signature. He had worked with her directly and recently enough to recognize immediately that what Derek brought him was not her handwriting, not her language, and not legally valid. He had not told Derek this. He had thanked him politely, said he would review everything carefully, and then he had called me. And then he had called the county sheriff's office. I sat in that chair and I felt the room tilt slightly, the way it does when your body understands something before your brain finishes processing it. I thought about the set of Derek's shoulders in the driveway in March. I thought about all those texts asking about financial documents. I thought about the fact that he hadn't come when she was dying, but he had come 3 hours after. And I thought about what he'd been looking for when he looked around the house like that. He'd been looking for her original documents. He hadn't found them because I had already given everything to Gerald months ago at our mother's request. I asked Gerald what happened now. He told me that presenting forged estate documents was a serious crime in our state, fraud, forgery, and depending on intent, attempted theft by deception. He told me that a detective had been assigned and that they would likely want to speak with me. He told me that the forged documents had already been photographed and placed in evidence, and that Derek did not know any of this had happened. I drove home on autopilot. I sat in my mother's kitchen at her table, and I looked at the oak trees through the window, and I thought about the fact that my brother had forged our dead mother's signature, had found someone, or had somehow managed himself to create fake legal documents, had planned this, had probably been planning it since March, since that quiet afternoon when he walked to his truck in silence. He called me that evening. He asked how I was doing. He asked if I'd spoken to Gerald lately. His voice was warm and casual and completely normal, and I told him I was fine and that I hadn't heard anything new and that I would let him know. I was not fine. But I was something else. I was done. The next morning, a detective named Alvarez came to the house. She was methodical and kind, and asked me to walk her through everything. The caregiving timeline, the original will, the conversations I'd overheard, Derek's behavior after Mom passed. I told her everything I knew. I showed her the texts asking about financial documents. I gave her Gerald's contact information, which she already had. She told me that Derek had likely hired someone to create the forgeries and that they were already working to trace that connection. She told me not to contact him about any of this. She asked me to continue behaving normally if he reached out. He reached out 4 more times over the next 10 days. I answered each time. I told him nothing. I asked him how work was going. Once I even asked if he wanted to come by and take some of Mom's things he might want to keep, and he said yes, maybe next weekend, and his voice stayed warm and casual and completely normal, and I kept my own voice just as steady. On a Thursday afternoon, 17 days after I sat in Gerald's office and heard what my brother had done, Derek walked into the county courthouse to follow up with a clerk about the estate filing. He believed, I think, that the process was moving slowly and that he might be able to push it forward. He believed, I think, that his forged documents were still quietly working their way through a system that hadn't yet noticed. Detective Alvarez and 2 officers were waiting for him. I was not there. I was at the house on Sycamore Drive, sitting on the back porch with a cup of tea, 1.5 teaspoons of honey, not 2, when my phone rang. It was Gerald. He said 3 words, "They have him." I sat with that for a long time. Here's what I need you to understand, because this is the part I think matters most. I did not feel triumphant. I want to be honest about that. There was no surge of satisfaction, no moment of cinematic victory. What I felt was something closer to exhaustion and grief, not for Derek, or not only for him, but for the version of a family I had needed to stop believing in. For my mother, who trusted both of her children and whose signature her son had forged. For the years I spent hoping that Derek would show up in the ways that counted, and the years he spent not showing up until showing up meant standing in a courthouse trying to steal a house he had never helped pay for. Derek was charged with forgery in the first degree and fraudulent transfer of property. He hired a lawyer, a good one, and the case took several months. I testified. Gerald testified. The person who had created the documents, a notary 2 counties over who had apparently done this kind of work before, took a plea deal and testified against Derek. Derek was convicted. He received a 3-year sentence with eligibility for parole after 18 months. He did not look at me during the sentencing. His lawyer asked the judge for leniency, given that he had no prior criminal record and that this was a family matter. The judge said that forging a dead woman's signature to steal from her grieving daughter was not a family matter, it was a crime. I still live on Sycamore Drive. I've repainted 2 of the rooms and planted a kitchen garden along the south fence, and I've learned that I like the quiet differently now, not because it feels safe in the naive way it used to, but because I earned it, because I know what it cost. People ask me sometimes if I hate my brother. I think about that question a lot. I don't think hate is the right word. Hate is a kind of attention, and Derek has taken enough of that from me and from our mother. What I feel is more like a door I have closed. Not with drama, not with a speech, just closed and locked, and I have moved to another part of the house. My mother used to say that you cannot pour from an empty cup. She meant it about caregiving, about not running yourself down for other people. But I think it applies here too. I am done pouring what I have into people who see me as a resource rather than a person. I am done confusing loyalty with self-erasure. If you are watching this and you are in a family situation where someone is slowly revealing that they see you as an obstacle or an asset rather than someone they love, I want you to pay attention to that. I want you to take it seriously before it becomes a courthouse and a detective and a 3-year sentence and a door you had to close on someone you once shared a childhood with. You are allowed to protect yourself. You are allowed to tell the truth. You are allowed to stay in the house on Sycamore Drive with a cup of tea and the oak trees and a life that belongs to you. I'm Claire, and I'm still here. There is something I have learned about the way consequences work, and it is this: they are not random. They follow the shape of the choices that came before them, as precisely as water follows the lowest ground. Derek did not end up in handcuffs because of bad luck. He ended up there because every decision he made, the silence in the driveway in March, the texts asking about documents, the forged signature, the walk into that courthouse, was a link in a chain he built himself. One deliberate choice at a time. I think about that a lot. I think about how easy it is to believe that we are getting away with something, that the world is not paying attention, that grief makes people soft and slow and easy to fool. Derek believed that. He looked at me and saw someone too tired and too sad to fight back. He looked at our mother's memory and saw an opportunity. He looked at a house full of 40 years of her life and saw a number. That is what happens when a person lets the habit of taking replace the habit of building. It starts small, skipping a Sunday call, sending gas station flowers instead of showing up, watching someone else carry what should have been a shared weight. And then one day, the muscle for showing up has atrophied completely, and all that is left is the reflex to take, to claim, to arrive only when there is something to collect. I am not telling this story to make Derek a villain in some satisfying narrative. I am telling it because I spent years trying to excuse that pattern in him, trying to explain it away, trying to believe that the right circumstances would finally bring out the brother I needed him to be. That is its own kind of mistake, not a moral failure, but an intellectual one. Refusing to see what is clearly in front of you is not loyalty. It is avoidance dressed up as hope. What saved me was not anything dramatic. It was the decision, made quietly over a long time, to stay clear-eyed, to keep records, to trust Gerald, to answer Derek's calls without revealing what I knew. That steadiness, that discipline of not reacting, of letting the truth move at its own pace, that is what allowed the right outcome to happen. I did not have to scheme. I only had to not collapse. If I could offer anything to someone watching this who is sitting with a version of what I went through, a family member who takes more than they give, who sees your kindness as softness, who is quietly planning something you haven't yet named, I would say your clarity is not cruelty. Seeing someone accurately is not the same as giving up on them. Protecting yourself is not a betrayal of anyone who deserved better from you. Build the life that is yours to build. Hold on to what you have earned with honesty and care. And when someone reaches out to take it, not because they need it, but because they decided they wanted it, let the truth do what the truth does. It always does, eventually. I'm Claire, And the oak trees are still there, and the tea is exactly right, and I am still here.